All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our second video for this new area study for Unit 2 Economics, where we're looking at free trade today. After the last class, we looked at globalization and kind of what that is, why it exists, why the world's moving towards it. Today we're going to look more into free trade, which is all about when goods and services can flow, or goods, services, people can flow between countries without any restrictions, the advantages, disadvantages of that. Then also some of the policies that governments tend to put in place to protect local industries, which is kind of pushing away from free trade, which we call protectionist policies. So let's get right into it because I don't want to waste your time, because when you do this, if you're my class, it's Friday and you've probably got better things to be doing than economics, but you need to do it anyway because it will help you next year. So what is free trade? Free trade is when there are no restrictions in place to alter the international flow or movement of goods, services, and capital between countries. So it means that when, say, you're moving goods and services from here to China, there would be no taxes, no tariffs, no quotas, nothing like that to stop your goods and services flowing freely there, which helps keep your cost of production as low as possible and also open you up to as many customers as possible, which is excellent. That's what you want. So that's what free trade is. The movement of goods and services across international borders with no restrictions in place. So some advantages of this: greater efficiency, economic growth, and incomes, because it means that if we have free trade, it means that rather than having the 27 million people in Australia as your customer base, you suddenly have access to 7 billion people who can buy your goods and services. I know that not all 7 billion can buy your goods and services, like a good portion of those are babies or in third world countries and may not have access to internet, but a large portion of them now have the option of buying your goods and or services, which means there can be a whole range of extra demand, which can help increase your overall efficiency because you can produce more and minimize your costs, increase our economic growth because we're going to be producing a higher amount in total, and increase incomes because there's going to be more jobs available because there's going to be needing more production. So that's an excellent advantage of free trade. It can increase international trade. That makes sense. Just more goods and services flowing across borders. And it can also lead to more jobs and employment, like we just said a moment ago, and also lower inflation and more choice, because if we have access to goods and services from overseas and businesses getting more efficient, they can pass that reduction in costs onto consumers, which means lower prices. So one of the big reasons why costs, even though things get more expensive over time, things are relatively cheaper now because we can just buy them from overseas. I gave an example of a HDMI cable in the last class of buying one for 99 cents from Hong Kong rather than $40 in Australia. And that's an example of lower inflation because you can get cheaper options from overseas. And also more choice. We're really lucky in Australia. We have so much choice when it comes to goods and services, food, because we have such a multicultural country, as well as so much trade with other countries. And it means that there's a lot of choice. So you can get foods from so many different countries. You can get clothing and brands from many different countries. And that's amazing. Like, that's really benefits our living standards because cheaper and more available. Great. Material cheaper, more available. We're going to be more satisfied. Non-material, excellent. One of the issues with more choice is we get into the problem we have now where we have all these streaming services and we sit around all night being like, what am I going to watch next? And then you scroll through for 1,000 hours where you don't end up picking anything and you watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine for the 1,000th time, or The Good Place. If you are a good human being, you should watch The Good Place. Go watch The Good Place after you finish your economics work. Great show. Some disadvantages of free trade. So some local businesses may not be able to compete with the wider world and therefore they might close down, which can lead to higher levels of unemployment, which is bad. But then also if they can't compete, they probably shouldn't be in that business. They should reallocate their resources to something we may be more competitive in. It may disproportionately benefit the rich. Business owners are going to be the ones who benefit most from this. Therefore, the distribution of wealth probably isn't going to be as fair as it could be. It encourages increased environmental degradation. So if there is more demand overall, we're probably going to, businesses don't care about the environment as much as they like to tell us they do. They'll probably start cutting down trees, using up all our natural resources at a faster rate to maximize their profits. And countries with unfair working conditions may exploit their labor. So a lot of production may move offshore because they know they can produce more cheaply and then ship their goods and services off to any other country to benefit them most, which is obviously not a great thing. If you look at, there's an example, you look at in Year 12 business at our school of Amazon, and the fact of, I think it's cost something like 7 cents for Amazon to make a t-shirt, and it goes through the process of like why that's the case. And some of their, I was about to call them sweatshops, but actually warehouses in India have had like multiple fires and deaths per year because the conditions are so horrific, which is not ideal for a business to have. So then on the opposite side of free trade, when things are getting less free overall, there are things called protectionist policies, which seek to restrict imports, advantage local producers, and interfere with the free working market in the allocation of resources. And some examples of these that exist are tariff barriers. So a really current example of this is, so this year, there was one point where the Prime Minister made some comment about coronavirus in China, and China was not happy about that. So China slapped our barley exports with an 80% tariff or something like that. And that meant that we couldn't export as much barley to China because it was way more expensive, which then harms our producers and then also benefits any local producers in China of barley because they don't have to compete as much. Another one is producer subsidies. For a long time in Australia, the automotive industry was being propped up by government subsidies so they could continue producing cars in Australia. It's been moved away from in recent times as they're not seen as being, like a lot of businesses, if you give them subsidies, they're not going to be as efficient as possible because they know the government's going to bail them out. Although the recent JobKeeper payments, which are given to businesses to cover their wage costs, is an example of a subsidy being used. It's interfering with the free market, but kind of necessary at the moment to prevent unemployment from skyrocketing. Import quotas, which is just limiting the amount of importing of a certain thing into a country to protect local producers. Anti-dumping legislation, which means you can't just any excess of a certain stock. So like if we had a ridiculous amount of barley, to keep going with that, we can't just dump that in a country at a really cheap price to hurt their local producers. Preferential treatment and local content laws. An interesting one of these. So in my late teens and early 20s, I did a lot of things on music tours, working on some music tours and stuff. And there was an interesting rule in Australia for a while, and it doesn't seem to exist now, but on any international tour, an Australian artist had to be on the lineup somewhere. And that was to protect local artists, get them business, which was actually kind of a good protectionist policy, but doesn't seem to exist now as much. Then also capital ownership and restrictions. So in Australia, I think they've changed things so China can't own more than 50% of like apartment buildings, things like that. Stops house prices in Australia from going too high, which means people can still afford homes, which is good, but it's to stop one country from having any undue influence over a country's resources, and also allow the market in Australia to kind of operate better. And that's it for this. So free trade, what it is, advantages, disadvantages, protectionist policies, how they work to make things less free overall. So that's it. You just learn from this, answer some questions about it, which will be on our Teams page in my class, and then you will be one step closer to the weekend, which is always great. So I hope this was beneficial to you. It's a quick 10 minutes of your life that you will hopefully have feeling really motivated afterwards to smash out those questions and then start doing something else. I know after this, I'm going to go for a walk and get some coffee because coffee is just delicious awake juice. So you enjoy the rest of your day and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.